Well, for those of you who are joining us for the first time, we're involved in a sermon series entitled The Game Plan. The focus of this series is on how we desire to partner with the Holy Spirit to really persuade people to trust and follow Jesus. We believe Jesus was serious when he said, "Go make disciples." And so far in this series, we have covered 3 pieces to our discipleship game plan. Now, who can share with me the very first piece of our discipleship game plan? Any volunteers? Just say it out loud. What's that? We're almost there. All right. This is why we repeat things, right? Okay. Say it with me. Create an invitation culture. An invitation culture. Good. On a regular basis, we want to invite people into spaces where they may encounter Jesus. And so we want to invite our friends, our neighbors, our coworkers to a Sunday morning worship, to a home group, to just hang out with you and other Christ followers as you do activities together. The second piece in our discipleship game plan, and I'm not going to risk it at this point, but Debbie got it right, is basically this. It is to practice radical hospitality. We want to provide a warm welcome to those who come into our spaces, but beyond that, we want to be a people and a place in which every single person has the opportunity to engage in genuine friendships. And so as we think about those 2 pieces so far, I gave you a couple of challenges. On create an invitation culture, I said make a list of people that you hope to invite and be praying for those people every single day. And I really want to encourage you to do that, and especially as we head towards Easter. But then, when we talked about practicing radical hospitality, my encouragement was to get into the habit of having lunch with at least one person every single week with the hope of just building a genuine friendship. Making friends, it's so important. Now, the third piece of our discipleship game plan is simply this. We want to teach and train in the ways of Jesus. Eventually, when we're in conversation and relationship with people who are spiritually seeking, we need to invite them into a Bible study. And last week, I shared with you a very simple Bible study that you can use with people entitled a Discovery Bible Study. And again, I want to encourage you, even if you start with just Christian friends, to start a discipleship or discovery Bible study with 2 or 3 other people, praying that you'll have the opportunity to then invite a coworker, a neighbor, a friend into that Bible study so that people can begin to learn about Jesus and his ways of doing life. So that's where we've been so far in this sermon series. But today, to really introduce the fourth piece of our discipleship game plan, I need to take you back to a don't flinch moment in the life of the disciples. Are you familiar with a don't flinch moment? That's one of those moments when you keep your head down so as not to make eye contact with anyone else, and you calm your breath because you know the first person that makes any type of movement is going to be called on. And really, in a don't flinch moment, the only thing you have to do is you have to outlast the person in the room who has ADHD. Now, typically, that's pretty easy unless you are that person, right? And I'm not sure exactly who was the disciple with ADHD. My hunch is it was probably Peter, but who knows for sure? One thing I'm certain of is this, though, is that every one of the 12, they were hoping beyond hope that they could outlast the other person because the task that was at hand was one that they didn't want to do. Now, then again, I may have completely misread the situation. There is the possibility that what needed to be done, it didn't even cross the disciples' mind. Those fellows may have been like the college student who just assumes that sooner or later when he runs out of clean clothes that somebody's going to show up and do his laundry for him. But then there comes that moment, that kid who he's worn his underwear right side out and inside out 2 or 3 different times. But then it hits him. You know what? Mom's not going to come by and pick up my laundry, and I'm not nearly good looking enough to get a co-head to do it for me. And then he realizes, I'm stuck doing this. And that moment, when you realize that you now have to do something that you've grown accustomed to other people doing for you, that is an ice-cold slap of reality, isn't it? And if there's one thing that the disciples had grown accustomed to people doing for them, it was simply this, is that every time they entered into a home, somebody was there to wash their feet. There was a slave, there was a servant, somebody was there to wash their feet. But on this particular occasion, nobody was there. Nobody was there to do that menial task. Now, any one of those 12 could have stepped up to wash the feet of the others, but not a single one of them did. Why not? Let's just start with the obvious. Hot, dusty, stinky sandal feet are nasty. Who wants to scrub someone else's bunions and pull out their toe jam, right? That's just gross. Now, sometimes when preachers preach this text to make a point, they'll ask an audience member up onto the stage, and they'll get down on their knees, and they'll wash their feet as to set a good example, and everybody's like, oh, isn't that precious? We'll always remember that. Listen, if you need me to do that for you to help you remember this sermon, all I can say is, this isn't the first sermon you've forgotten, and it won't be the last, okay? So we're not going to do that this morning. That's the obvious. The not so obvious, behind the obvious, is this. To wash someone else's feet was an admission of inferiority. Servants wash the feet of masters, not the other way around. And not a single one of those disciples was ready to make that type of concession. In fact, the gospel writer Luke tells us this. On this particular occasion, as they were sitting around the table, reclining, getting ready to take the Passover meal, that moment in which Jesus instituted the supper that we just participated in, they got caught up in conversation about their individual rank in the latest disciple power poll. Luke says in Luke chapter 22 and verse 24, a dispute also arose among them as to which of them was considered to be greatest. So that's what's going on. Nobody's willing to do it. Nobody wants to make that concession. But what they refused to do, Jesus did. And so we pick up the story as told by John in John chapter 13, beginning in verse 4. He, speaking of Jesus, got up from the meal, took off his outer clothing, and wrapped a towel around his waist. And after that, he poured water into a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that was wrapped around him. This job was so far beneath Jesus. He was the only one at the table deserving to wear a crown. He knew it, the disciples knew it. In fact, just hours prior, people from all over the world, they had proclaimed it, Jesus, King of Israel. That's who Jesus is. And so why did King Jesus make the decision that I'm going to wash the feet of the disciples? Was it simply because the stench of feet odor kind of got to him, was ruining his dinner? Or did he think to himself, you know what, it's just easier for me to do this than to try to convince any one of these yahoos to actually get up and do it. I can't wait forever on them. Is that the reason? Let's go back to the way John sets up the scene. John says this in John chapter 13 and verse 1. It was just before the Passover festival. Jesus knew that the hour had come for him to leave this world and go to the Father. And having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. Jesus took on this task because he genuinely cared about his disciples. The language that's used there for he loved them to the very end, it actually means this. He loved them without limit. He loved them to the full extent. I want you to just kind of let this sink in for a moment. Among those whose feet he washed was one who just a few hours later, and he knew it, was going to sell him out. And that's one of the things that makes Jesus so different than most of us. Jesus did not allow the feelings, the attitudes, the actions of another person impact his ability to lovingly serve. I'm not there. As we've talked about in this series of discipleship, we're all at different phases on the faith continuum. There are those people who just absolutely, they're not at a place where they believe. They don't buy any of this Jesus story. That may be you this morning. If that's the case, we're just so glad you're here. We're glad that you're here with your doubts. We're glad that you're here with your questions. Please know you belong among us. And then there are those individuals who've moved from a place of unbelief to a place of just disinterest. And so you're kind of here, and you're not real interested, though. You like the community, you like the music, but as far as the story goes, it's not a place of interest yet, and that's understandable. Again, glad you're here. But then some people, they've moved from disinterest, and they've moved to this place of, you know what, I am interested, and I find this fascinating, and I'm not quite at a point of wanting to make a commitment, but I'm along this path, and then you start to move into this place of commitment, and you're ready. Okay, I'm all in on this, and then what we're trying to get to is fully formed in Jesus, and none of us are there yet. So I say all that to say, for most of us, we're at this commitment side of things. We're not fully formed in Jesus yet, but we've made a commitment, but we've got a long way to go. And when it comes to this, I've got a long way to go. I'm not like Jesus. The attitudes, the feelings, the actions of other people, it impacts my ability to lovingly serve them. For instance, if I knew that Jeff Dumo was plotting to have me fired on Tuesday of this week, and then he said to me at the end of this service, "Hey, Sean, could you help me clean off the stage this morning?" I would say something to him that would get me fired before Tuesday, probably. Because I'm not fully formed in Jesus yet. I've got a ways to go. Jesus also washed the disciples' feet, really because he wanted to teach them an important lesson. In hindsight, the lesson was this: why his death was necessary. So you pick up the story in John 13, verse 6 and 7. He came to Simon Peter, who said to him, "Lord, are you going to wash my feet?" Jesus replied, "You do not realize now what I'm doing, but later you will understand." "No," said Peter, "you shall never wash my feet." Jesus answered, "Unless I wash you, you have no part with me." He used this humble act of washing feet to teach them and everybody who had encountered this lesson later a very important spiritual truth, and spiritual truth was this: unless you're washed by the blood of Jesus Christ, completely cleansed, then you remain with this filth of sin all over you and separated from God. Because there's no possible way that we can clean ourselves. Christian upbringing, good works, moral lifestyle, theological education, it's not enough. It's not going to do it. It's not enough to scrub off one sin. No one other than Jesus can clean us up. Not Moses, not Abraham, not Buddha, not Gandhi, not Muhammad, not Deepak Chopra, not Brene Brown, not Taylor Swift. No one other than Jesus. And then finally, Jesus picked up the towel and the basin because he wanted to show his disciples how to live. Verse 12 through 15. When he had finished washing their feet, he put on his clothes and returned to his place. "Do you understand what I've done for you?" he asked them. "You call me teacher and Lord, and rightly so, for that's what I am. And now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also should wash one another's feet. I've set you an example that you should do as I've done for you." The disciples may have been slow learners, but they learned. They picked up the towel, and they discipled others to do so as well. And because they did, lovingly serving others became a distinguishing feature of Christianity that really distinguished that particular movement from every other religion of the world. In fact, it attributed to the just meteoric rise of Christianity in the first few centuries. In an article entitled "The Compassion of the Early Church," Ben Hine writes this: "The earliest Christians understood that even in a context where they were the persecuted minority, it was their mission and their charge to display Christ-like compassion to all. This was what they were known for, so much so that in the 4th century, the Roman Emperor Julian launched a campaign to try and create pagan charities which could rival the charity of the church. He complained in one letter that the explosive growth of the church was caused by their moral character, even if pretended, and by their benevolence towards strangers. He complained in another letter, the Christians support not only their poor, but ours as well. And everyone can see that our people lack aid from us. The early followers of Jesus cared for the poor and marginalized, trafficked and enslaved, minority and immigrant, sick and dying, to a degree that baffled and irritated and convicted their unbelieving neighbors. The early followers of Jesus did the things that nobody else wanted to do for people that nobody else wanted to do them for. And so what about today? Could the same be said about the church today? Ben Hine, he writes this. It's his take on it. I fear that we are known more for our pride, critical spirit, and defensiveness. I believe that much of the shrinking collapse and decay we see in our churches, the lack of conversions, the closure of churches, all has very little to do with our culture out there, and has much to do with having lost our way in here. The renowned Anglican pastor John Stott once said, "We should not ask what is wrong with the world, for that diagnosis has already been given. Rather, we should ask, what has happened to salt and light?" And it's easy to see how we've lost our way. 24/7, we are discipled by a culture that tries to convince us to be consumers in which the world orbits around us. We're discipled by a culture that wants us to believe that the ultimate aim in life is comfort and pleasure, and that the higher up we are on the pecking order system, the more we should expect other people to serve us. But Jesus just flips this on its head. And he says, if you're going to follow me, if you're going to be a disciple of mine, then you have to be willing to give your life away for the betterment of others. He says this in Matthew chapter 20 and verse 26, "Whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first must be your slave. And just as the Son of God did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." And this is the fourth piece of our discipleship game plan. We are going to be a community of disciples who lovingly serve others. So at this time, Marion Parker, our children's minister, she's going to share with you some of the ways that we're trying to put this into practice right here at Campbell.
So it's one of my absolute favorite things to get to know who you are, what your gifts and your passions are, and to try and match those to a need that we have here at Campbell. Wanted to share, some of these things are going to be very familiar if you're a longtime member here, but if you're a guest or new to our church, then you may not be aware of all of the different ways that we are trying to put this into practice. We have a few ways that are more community-based, where we are targeting the people that live right around us and the students that attend CCS. We had over 1,200 people that came through for our Trunk and Treat event that we had the opportunity to then invite and get to come to our church. We had a Cocoa with Santa event where we had a huge number, same thing. We got to share who we were as a church. We have lots of things that are going on where this church has ministries that are doing things such as serving those with food instability, serving the homeless, teaching English as a second language, taking our recyclables and changing that into actual change that can go into serving those and providing for those that are doing mission work. Even just providing handwritten notes. We have a diversity and inclusion team that are helping us to love and understand. We have a Sunday morning team, the AV team, thank you so much. Our praise team, all of those that have parts in our service. One of the reasons that we have kids in here for the first part is to get to see all of you serve and to love each other. We have some that are more age-based, ministry-based. I'm in here because of that. I have a team over there helping, and that is because of you guys volunteering. We have a nursery where we have adults and teens, and so a special shout out to the teens that help in there. So teens, student ministry, elementary, preschool, our young adults, our one ministry for our singles, and we also have our young at hearts. When you serve in a group that is not specific for you, there's intergenerational community that is happening through that. If you want to get connected, what we're trying to say is we have opportunities, and we'd like to help you with that. God doesn't call perfect people to do his work. He calls an imperfect church to do his perfect work. I wanted to leave you with one example. I have a mom and her daughter, and she came to me about a year ago, and she said, do you have anything that my daughter can do? Her daughter's first grade at that time. I thought, okay, let me think about that. And I said, I would love to have some get well cards, some handmade get well cards. And she said, okay. And so she made a nice little bunch, and she gave them to me, and I've gone through all of them. And I told her a few weeks ago, I said, I would love some more. And she said, we're on it. It doesn't matter what age you are. You can serve others. So I just wanted to tell you, she came to me and she said, the reason I'm asking you to do this or to give us an idea of something, I want to teach my daughter at this age early on how she can learn to serve others. So thank you.
That's great. Thanks, Marion. We have so many ways, amazing ways that we can serve together, but we can't wait for special projects and special events. Service needs to be an everyday way of life. And there's so many needs around us to meet, but oftentimes, so many of us, and when I say us, I mean me in particular, we can be busy and so self-absorbed that we miss the obvious needs right in front of us. And so I want to encourage you this morning to at least once a week ask a very simple question. And the question is this: in the spaces in which I spend the most time, what is the most pressing need? What's the most pressing need in your neighborhood? Is there a neighbor who needs help with their landscaping? Is there a working single mother who needs some help taking care of her kids? Do the kids in the neighborhood need somebody to put up a basketball hoop that they can shoot on and just spend time in your driveway? What's the need? What about at your workplace? What's the one thing that nobody else wants to do? Is it cleaning out the break room fridge? Would it be dealing with the customer who's always complaining? Would it be working the late shift? What about in your home? What's the job that nobody wants to do there? Take out the trash, clean the bathroom, do the laundry. You start there. Ask the question, but then be sensitive as to how to best help. It's possible to serve with the best intentions, but end up doing more harm than good. I'll give you a simple illustration of this. I think I shared this story with a Bible class at one time, so forgive me for repeating for some of you. But the first winter I moved to Illinois, I made the decision that I would serve my neighbors by snow blowing their driveway. And they loved it. I mean, they loved it so much that I got cookies and snacks and a bottle of wine at Christmas. They just loved it. And so for the next several years, I became snow blow the cul-de-sac guy in the neighborhood. But I couldn't quite figure out when it turned summertime what was the best way to serve my neighbors. Until one day, one of the boys hit a wiffle ball over the fence of my next door neighbor, and I went over there. I saw on the other side that his grass was almost up to my kneecaps. This was a new neighbor. And so I thought, he's new to the neighborhood. What he could probably use is somebody to mow his backyard for him, so that would relieve him of that stress. So I just let myself in his backyard. I mowed his yard. I thought that's a nice neighbor, right? I thought it was at the time, but evidently he didn't quite receive it that way. You're shaking your head. Yeah, you should have seen this coming, Smith, right? In hindsight, I should have. It ended up making him feel a little bit small, like he couldn't handle it on his own. And so that taught me it's important to ask for permission to serve, rather than just assuming that somebody wants or needs your help. And even when they do, it's probably a good thing to invite them in to think about how they can be a part of the solution. You see, the reason my neighbor had not mowed his grass is because he was new to the area. In fact, he was new to the States. He didn't have a lawnmower. And because he spoke very little English, going to Home Depot to buy a lawnmower was intimidating. If I would have just taken the time to have the conversation to find out what was going on in his world before deciding just to take it upon myself to serve him in some way, I would have discovered that maybe a better option would have been to loan him my lawnmower, or to do it together, or maybe to go to Home Depot together and see if we could make that purchase. It was an important lesson for me in that particular moment. You see, as we serve people, it's important that we protect and honor their dignity to the very best of our ability. I've been told that Larry James is a master of this. Larry serves as the CEO of Citygate. Citygate works with the inner city of Dallas. And from what I understand, when Larry goes into a community to assess needs, he'll invite the community to come be a part of a conversation. As they have this conversation together, he'll ask them to identify the most pressing needs in their particular community. But then, instead of just jumping right in with, here's all the ways that we can serve your community, he takes the time to have a conversation and ask, how do you think you can best serve one another? And he lets them brainstorm about that. You see, Larry understands that it's far better than being the hero of their particular story, Citygate being the hero. He wants to equip them to be the hero of their own story. That's huge, isn't it? Because all of us want to be the hero of our stories, right? Not just a charity case. And so I love that. I love that about Larry James, and I hope that we can be those types of followers of Jesus as well. Now, let's be sure that once we do serve, that we give credit to the real hero. It's Jesus who takes our meager offerings, our time, our talents, our finances, and he uses those things to do so much good beyond even what we can imagine. And so when we have those opportunities to serve people, we want to make sure that we give credit back to Jesus. You say, well, how do you do that? What's it sound like? Here's a simple illustration. Tomorrow, because you've been convicted this morning, you're going to go to your workplace, you're going to go into the break room, you're going to clean out that fridge. I mean, you're going to get it spotless in the break room, and everybody's going to be so excited, and they're going to say to you, well, why would you do that? I mean, nobody's done it in like 2 years. Why did you decide to do it today? And here's all you're going to say. I think it's a simple expression of the love that Jesus Christ has for each and every one of us. That's why I wanted to do it. No other reason. And we give credit back, just a small expression to give credit back to Jesus Christ. And it's those small expressions that can truly lead a person to faith. And so I wrap this up with a simple story. Many, many years ago on a Sunday night, it was a Sunday night service at the congregation I was serving at the time. Our Sunday evening service, you remember those, but the Sunday evening service was interrupted with the news that one of our deacons, Bob, who had been in Colorado on a fishing trip with a group of buddies, he was in a major car wreck. That car wreck left Bob, who was a husband and father of 2 teens, paralyzed from, I believe, the shoulders down. And so immediately the church family, they responded and they began to serve this family. They just started showing up with meals, and then they did projects at the house, and then some of the men would sit with Bob, especially on Monday nights, and watch Monday Night Football, and then it became more often during the week because his wife had to take extra shifts at work and work late into the night just to provide for the family. And so they were serving this great way, but what nobody realized is Bob's next-door neighbors were watching this. They were watching people come and go night and day, and it finally got the best of them. They were super curious, and so they went to Bob's house, and they just said, hey, listen, we're curious. Who are all these people coming and going out of your home? Is this family? Yeah, I mean, it seems like you've got a huge family. And Bob said, it is. It's my church family. And they were so moved by that they started showing up at our church services. They started meeting people. They started learning about Jesus. And eventually they committed their lives to Jesus Christ. because that's the power and the impact that lovingly serving others can have on a person's life. Listen, I don't think this is any secret. The church has taken a major hit over the past few years. We are surrounded by people now who are incredibly cynical, if not antagonistic, about the church. And to be honest with you, I don't know if we can turn it around. But I believe with all of my heart, perhaps our very best opportunity is if we begin to lovingly serve others in the name of Jesus.